Over the years, I've been quite reluctant to play free-to-play gacha games. Unfortunately, when it comes to fan servicey games, a lot of them have gone that way. Basically, the formula is that these games have a bunch of different characters you can obtain by spending in-game currency, and when you run out of in-game currency, you buy it with real currency. I'm sure most of you don't need an explanation, but for those who don't know, that's how it works. The main point here is that it's chance-based, and also the fact that in-game currency can be a little bit slow to accrue. So I decided to give a few of these games a try, but with a rule that I won't spend any money on them. In order to be a good game, as far as I'm concerned, it needs to be enjoyable without spending any money. Not that I'm against spending a bit of money if I like the game in order to support the developers. In fact, many people do just that. In this video, I'm going to talk about Zenless Zone Zero, a game made by Mihiyo, though they're rebranding themselves as HoYoverse these days. At least I think that's how that works. Whatever the case may be, it's the same company behind Genshin Impact is the point. But Zenless Zone Zero is very different in a lot of ways. Instead of a free roam fantasy game, Zenless is more like an action RPG beat 'em up sort of thing in a setting that's both futuristic, sci-fi, and retro, with many 80s and 90s elements. Just so you know, this is PC footage that you're seeing. It's available also on iOS and Android in terms of mobile platforms, and on the PS5 as a console release. There's cross-play and cross-progression. I logged in with the same account on the computer and Android tablet. Seems to work just fine. But on the PS5 it didn't quite work so well, but that was because of a very specific reason. It created a dummy HoYoverse account on the PS5, so I had to do a weird thing where I had to register that account with an email, so it tied the PSN account to it, then log into the HoYoverse account on the computer and unlink the PSN account. Then I would go back to Zenless on the PS5 and log in with my proper HoYoverse account, and then it would link the PS account to it. And yeah, that's kind of annoying, but thankfully that worked out. It is worth mentioning that specific settings like controls, audio options, etc. stay on their respective devices, which makes sense because you may want to have different settings for different devices. Zenless Zone Zero is set in a post-apocalyptic world called New Eridu. I already mentioned the futuristic sci-fi and retro elements earlier. You may also notice the world is not just populated by humans. There's a few animal-eared people too, and there's just outright bears and stuff walking around. New Eridu is threatened by something called the Hollows. It's like a dimensional thing that threatens to swallow areas of the world. Inside these hollows are monsters called ethereals, and they, well, to be brief, they're a bit ungood for humanity. Even though there's, non-human races in the game, but I think you know what I mean. The main character is either someone called Wise or Belle. They are siblings, and you get to choose which one to play as, even though either choice doesn't influence the story as a whole. Wise is the more level-headed and calm one, while Belle is more excitable in comparison, for the most part anyway. Once you're past like the tutorial phase, you can start roaming around with either one though, so that's kind of nice. Wise and Belle are proxies. They guide people through the hollows. Normally the hollow investigation unit does that, but there are jobs that they won't accept. Sometimes they consider things to be a bit too high risk or just not legal, so that's where proxies like Wise and Belle come in. They accept those kind of jobs, but they're technically not operating within the law, so they have to keep everything on the down low, which is why they operate under an alias. Due to various events, they abandoned their old alias, which was Phaeton. They had legendary status, but now they have to rebuild their reputation under a new name. Proxies get their commissions through the Intronaut. I wonder who came up with that name. Proxies have a level, and a higher level means you'll be able to accept better commissions because it represents how good they are at their job. In terms of gameplay, a higher level raises stuff like the level cap and, things like that. But proxies don't actually go through the hollow themselves, they employ agents to do that. Those are the playable characters. You can get them to join you by completing certain story missions or prerequisites, or of course through the gacha system. Overall, the story and side quests are quite interesting. I think the world is pretty immersive and it's enjoyable learning about all the different characters you meet along the way. There's a mixture of serious and more comedic or silly moments. Now I'm going to describe the basic game flow. The basics are that you get a commission, which are essentially quests. You start the mission, do several fights, and then you earn rewards, which are money and materials to upgrade characters, skills, equipment, etc. Some commissions can also have a dungeon crawling type aspect to it. It's represented as walls and paths of TVs. They are pretty linear for the most part. You navigate along, collect things, and if you come into contact with enemies, well, you have to fight those enemies. There's other things you can do depending on the commission. Sometimes you can ignite bombs to kill enemies or clear up a path. The nice thing is that there seems to be a decent variation with the types of things you have to do within this game mode. The battle mechanics are pretty easy to learn, but there's enough here to make it more than just a button mashing experience. You have a party of 3 characters at a time, plus 1 additional Bangu, or however you pronounce that. It's these little tiny weird robot thingies, which I'm pretty sure I've not even mentioned yet, but that's what they are. When you're fighting, there's normal attacks. You home in on or aim at whatever enemy you're pointing towards with the WASD keys there, or left analog stick if you're on controller. You can do special attacks when your meter is high enough. You can also chain together group attacks, which, as you may have guessed, does a noticeable amount more damage. There's also something called the decibel meter, which has nothing to do with how decibels normally work in real life. Basically, every hit on an enemy makes it go up, and then once it gets to 3000 points, you can unleash an ultimate attack. Decibels aren't tied to a character, but rather the entire party, so if you want, you can switch to another character before activating the ultimate. That way you can strategize which one's best to use, or, which animation you prefer, I guess. You can dodge attacks when you time it correctly. There's both a visual and auditory indicator when the attack is about to take place. Alternatively, you can switch characters instead of dodging, which will give you a cool animation of the incoming character parrying the attack. Getting your timing right is pretty important in this game. If you're good at dodging and switching characters, you can win with even a severely underpowered party. Leveling up characters isn't done through experience gathering, but instead you have to manually do it with the stuff that you collect. Your internet level dictates your level cap. You can also upgrade skills and W engines. W engines are like equipable items that characters have, so instead of things like weapons or armors, it's W engines. If you're lacking any materials for upgrading, you are given options on how to acquire them. The nice thing is that it brings you exactly where you need to go if you click on one of the options. For example, in those HIA VR battles, it even pre-selects which enemies you need to fight in order to get the required materials. That's nice for me because I think that sort of stuff is annoying, so yeah. That makes it much less annoying, so that's good for me. You can get commissions in various ways. Obviously, there's the main story. There's also side quests you can get by talking to various people or checking the internet for commissions. Sometimes you'll just be contacted if you reach a certain level. 6th Street does have a day and night system. Oh yeah, by the way, 6th Street it's like that neighborhood in Persona 5 where your main character lives. So yeah, there's a day and night system, but it's actually split up into 4 segments rather than 2. And various things happen at various times of the day. There's like a schedule that you can look up, and then you can see which time of day it has to be for certain quests. Let's talk about characters now. You got a bunch of characters at the beginning, which is nice. They're all pretty cool and interesting, so it doesn't feel like you're getting junk and are forced to try and pull for better ones. Another nice thing is that when you're playing the main story and also the character side stories, you'll be able to play with characters you don't have. That's when it says trial on the party selection screen. It's nice that they do that because it makes the story fights more interesting. And it never feels like you're stuck with your set of characters, at least when you're playing the storylines there. When it comes to pulling characters, that's where the annoying in-game currencies come in. I can't even remember what they're called. I had to look it up when I was writing the script. It's master tapes and encrypted master tapes, among some other stuff. You have to have a certain amount in order to do a signal search, is what the game calls it. I will say at least you can convert polychrome, monochromatic film, and all that other bullshit you get from commissions, so you don't have to give it that much thought. For the most part, you can just play and then check in once in a while to see if you have enough materials for searches. Of course, it's more cumbersome than just paying money, but overall I think it's thankfully not a painful experience. I think the balance of playing to get the materials is decent enough. But to answer the question, is the game still fun to play without spending money? I will say yes. I don't know how it is after you play through all of the storylines, but from my perspective here, it feels like there's always something to do or something to aim for. We'll see if that changes in the future, but it is a popular game that I'm sure will get many more updates, so I don't think someone like me will ever run out of stuff to do. More likely I'll lose interest first and then start playing again once there's more stuff that's been added. In terms of difficulty, Zenless Zone Zero is relatively easy, at least at first. Dying is pretty rare even if you don't upgrade right away. Even if you're very much underpowered, a lot of properly timed dodging and character switching will keep you alive long enough to eventually beat your enemies. There's also elemental stuff going on, but I don't even look at that. I don't really think it's that necessary. If a fight takes a bit longer, then it takes a bit longer. Besides, if the game was too easy, it'd be boring. You can play more difficult versions of the story chapters after completing them, plus there's certain missions, specifically those VR missions, where you're incentivized to beat enemies within a certain time period. So there are reasons to actually properly strategize and compile some preset parties for certain situations. And also there's this point in chapter 2 where there's a break from the main story and you have to get to, Internet level 30. And I'm noticing there's a lot of fights where you do have to look at not just leveling up your characters, but maybe also leveling up some stuff like skills or W engines and things like that. There's a couple of commissions where my party's barely making a dent in the enemy's health bar. The game looks very good, as I'm sure you've noticed by now. I'm impressed actually. It utilizes cell shading. In terms of art direction, it does seem to be based on Persona games with a bit of a skater and punk aesthetic mixed in among some other things. Strangely, there's both futuristic and 80s and 90s influences at the same time. You'll see tube TVs alongside flat screens, not to mention the MCs run a video store full of VHS tapes. The thing that really impressed me the most was the special attack animations and some other details here and there. There's animations here you'd normally think you'd see in cutscenes, but they're actually rendered in real time. I think it looks so good, especially the finishing blow cutscenes. The action always freezes when a character is in some sort of cool pose or in midair or something. And how the camera angles are and all the effects, I think they're all so well done. It's very clear that they spent a lot of time making these animations look good and seamless. There's no jarring cut where the special attack or whatever starts and ends. The only time you're looking at a pre-rendered scene is when the level is loading and then it clearly switches from the video to the game, which makes sense. Plus there's the occasional cutscenes when, like a lot of stuff is happening. Other highlights are a ton of little details like characters having unique intros, animations, and things like that give them a lot of personality. Not just during exploration and battle, but even like in the menus, like when you're scrolling through, they all have unique animations, which are cool. One of my favorite little details is during those intros when a level just loaded up. Unbi is a good example. She's pretty emotionless the way she talks and acts, but her subtle eye movements give away that she's actually looking around and scanning her environments. And there's this split-second moment where she looks directly into the camera, and you just kind of know that she feels more emotions than she lets on. I think that's just so well done. Other characters are, of course, different, and it's great how it matches up with their personality. I know the developers made a ton of money with Genshin Impact, and it seems like a sizable amount of that was invested into the graphics for Zenless. Interestingly, cutscenes are a bit more simple. Occasionally you'll get fully animated action sequences, but those aren't that common. There's 3D visual novel style cutscenes that appear far more often. Other times the action will be portrayed in comic book style panels. I guess it's an easy way of doing it, and shuffling these types of dialogue scenes / cutscenes around like that gives it a bit more variety so you don't really think about it too much. I would like to mention and point out the cars in this game. They aren't licensed, but they have obvious real-life counterparts, and car enthusiasts can do a bit of car spotting, which is fun, even when it comes to car parts. I mean, obviously these are SSR Mark IIIs. This is PC footage you're seeing at maximum settings. There are no slowdowns or any stuttering at 1080p. My computer has an AMD Ryzen 5 3600X, a slightly low 16GB of RAM, and an NVIDIA RTX 470, though I'm sure my old GTX 970 would have handled the game reasonably well too. It did with Genshin, so why not here? I didn't record any footage of the other parts of the game, but I will tell you what I experienced. The PS5 game looks almost exactly the same as the PC game on maximum, except there's I think a few things that are not quite as good. And of course, it's running at 4K on the PS5. I think it is native. It does look great, and thankfully it runs at 60 FPS. Not sure if there's any more quality differences between the PS5 and PC, since I didn't compare them side by side. But the only thing I really noticed was the anti-aliasing was noticeably better on PC, while the PS5 version had a few more noticeable jagged edges. There are slowdowns in some instances on the PS5. Like in some stages it will just not run at 60 FPS, and other times it'll also dip down when you're hitting a lot of characters at the same time. Oddly, the character selection screen stutters. And the stuttering coincides with that buzzing noise the PS5 makes when there's more graphically intensive stuff going on. You know, like that sound. So when it's stuttering, it goes something like that. I tried the game on a Samsung Galaxy Tab S7 Plus, and the textures looked obviously worse. I didn't see a way to make them look any better. In the settings, I think the quality is acceptable for that sort of experience, you know, on a tablet. Probably even less noticeable on a phone. The sound in Zenless is excellent. Attacks make a satisfying noise when they hit. Dodging and parrying are very distinctive and exciting sounding. When you switch characters, the incoming characters will often say unique lines to the character that's tagging out. The music is a highlight. Even though there's jazzy tracks here and there, you'll hear predominantly electronic music of various genres. There's actually a lot of variety. You'll hear influences from dubstep, rap, trap, bass-heavy 808 style stuff, 90s techno. It's all really enjoyable, and yeah, if you're curious, you can just search it up on YouTube. Just listen to what's going on there. That is much better than me trying to describe what kind of genres are going on in this game. One thing I like to do is bringing the volume of everything except the music slightly down, just so that the music is a bit louder in the overall mix. Overall, I think they did a very good job on making the soundtrack memorable. It's one of the highlights of this game. The game is voiced in 4 languages: Chinese, English, Japanese, and Korean. I set it to Japanese even though I know it's a Chinese game. I don't know, it just felt right to me. Not to mention the Japanese dub does feature some heavy hitters when it comes to voice actors. The English voiceovers sounded alright to me when I did have them on for a bit though, just so you know. My overall verdict is that yes, Zenless Zone Hero is fun even without paying money. I haven't spent a penny, and I don't mean that figuratively. Don't hold it in for too long, it's not good for your health. The game has lots of things to it, so it doesn't really get boring. The storylines are enjoyable to follow. The world is something you can immerse yourself in. The soundtrack is distinctive and really great. And of course, the graphics are excellent. Plus, you get a sense that the developers actually cared, as there are interesting and fun little details throughout the entire game. So that's that. Let me know what you think of the game if you've played it. Remember, I do have a Patreon. I haven't mentioned that in a while, but if you want to, you can check that out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.